I'm Jason Story, and this is Maxwell's Midland.
Hi, welcome back to the Maxwell's Midland Show. I'm your weekly tour guide, and here at Maxwell's Midland, we like to say that everyone has a story, but rarely do we have someone in here, and you know what joke is coming next, that actually is a story. And with us today is Jason Story.
Hey, Kevin.
You might know him from just being out in the community. You might know him from the Midland Business Alliance, Regrow Midland, the Midland Country Club. So we have all these places where folks might know you from, but I think today they're really going to get to know you if they take a look at this episode.
Yeah, here we go. You know, I'm always here or then somewhere else, but here I'm in one place for a long period of time, so we'll see.
One of my favorite things that you say is you talk about work-life balance and how there really isn't this thing called work-life balance. Are you telling me if I'm not living while I'm at work?
Yeah.
It's this concept of, you know, you're much more than that. So I really, before we get into any sort of framework that we're going to talk about today, and I am really excited to talk about some talent framework in a part 2 of this episode. But I really want to get to know you and really kind of your journey here to Midland because you're from Michigan, correct?
Yep. Oakland County.
Oakland County.
Yeah,
so that's a wide scoping area. I mean, there's a lot more people in Oakland County than there is in Midland County. So what was that like growing up? Where'd you go to high school at?
2 different high schools. I went to Lakeland High School, and then I finished up at Milford High. Both pretty small towns. Maybe Milford might be something that you could approximate to the size or maybe the feel of Midland. A little bit smaller in radius, but really quaint, small downtown area. Pretty nice place.
So are they working in the same way to try and drive people to their downtown, or did it feel more like an accessory to the metro area?
Well, so I was like 17, so I'm kind of like in this high school space, you know, working and going to school and kind of oblivious to the way that the world ticks. I think I was trying to figure out how I ticked and maybe some of the people around me ticked. You have the General Motors proving grounds there, so as far as like an anchor, you know, that a lot of people are employed through, you could say that Milford is certainly supported by having that entity there, and that's kind of actually what drove us to live there too.
Well, that's awesome. So how many kids did you graduate with then, and what was like that size? I'm just trying to get the feel for kind of where Jason comes from and where this heartbeat for maybe community comes from.
It was a couple hundred. I was new as a junior, which is really cool because everybody knows you're new. I was also new as a freshman, which wasn't so great because nobody knew that you were new. Everybody just thinks you went to the other middle school and you don't really have an opportunity to share that out. So it was a couple hundred, a small group. At that time, I'd kind of moved around a little bit so that I was like, all right, I need to be focusing on other things. I only got 2 years to get socialized, and that whole popularity stuff and getting in social circles is going to take a minute, you know. So I had my friends and things like that, but I was kind of thinking on some other things about like having some close friendships and then also kind of focusing on working at that point. And I do like what you said about the work-life thing is maybe because I work so much that I have to, you know, be tilted towards that as like, well, if I'm going to work this much, I got to be alive while I'm doing it. So heck yeah.
Absolutely. And I just think it's important that, you know, we get to know the people in our community that are kind of driving this messaging. And I really look at you as a leader in the space of talent development, retention. And I think we're extremely fortunate to have you here in Midland. And, you know, whatever we did in those spaces to try and keep you here, whether that was you meeting your significant other, whether that was finding a great work opportunity, whatever it was that kept you here, I think we're extremely lucky to have you here in Midland and really excited to have some pretty in-depth conversation with you today. And,
right on, yeah.
It's just really, really good stuff. So that journey took you from there, and then there's this large period of time, right, in between there, not to give up any ages here or give up any, any telling
I don't know
facts,
what filters we use on the podcast, but it'll probably be self-evident. But, you know, so I'm just over 40, and I moved away from Oakland County in 2007. It was a little too quiet for me, and I moved away to New York. Upstate New York, but I was able to be pretty darn close to New York City. I really liked the energy of that, the metropolitan energy of that. And then moved around the country, actually, from New York to California. I got to live in the Caribbean for a little bit. Came home for a year as well in the middle of that to be able to connect with family during a time where that was important. And then I was in D.C. for like 6 years prior to coming to Midland, like late 2018.
Now, did all of those places feel like home to you, or were you just trying to find that in all of these places?
I think mostly trying to, you know, people say I was trying to find myself. You know, it's like maybe you do that forever. And I think that to a degree you should. I don't think that it was like an absence of knowing that, but looking for what environments or what places felt like a match to me, like feeling that energy within myself and being kind of clear on what that is. And then knowing that I'm in a good environment based on the way that that energy is then feeding back into me, and then using that almost as like a measuring stick for like, okay, I'm in the right place at the right time.
It's so important that you mention it just like that too, because so much of what we do here is talking about the emotion that's involved with place. And this idea of place has really never been more important. And we were riffing a little bit before the show started. Folks working remotely, and it's like, do you want people to work in your community or live in your community? Well, ideally, you probably want both.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what needs to come first? If people are going to want to work in their community, they're probably going to want to live in your community, and positioning that in a way that really makes sense. And if you can unlock the golden box of people want to live in your community, even if they are working elsewhere, I think that is actually the magic sauce. Although we want to keep jobs here and keep them centralized, it's just a wonderful thing when you think back to the feeling that you have in those places. And I find it interesting that you lived in the Caribbean. This is something I do not know about you. So what took you there?
So I
Is it like an ayahuasca retreat? Like, what are you doing?
Well, this is kind of like, because I work so much, and usually there's things to do at work, it's like the me part doesn't come up too much. So this is like the biggest sort of expose, if you can call it that. But I studied psychology getting into my 20s. That was my original field, and I was pretty darn good at it. And I was like, man, it's going to take forever to get my doctorate's degree. And before I can be a clinician, it's going to be like 10 years away. And all this is really theory. And I'm like 20, I don't know too much life experience on how to like make that something you can chew on and actually get a grip on. It's always pretty good at cooking. So I actually tried it out. I went to a local culinary program, did pretty good. Was told that, I think 6 weeks later, you got to get to New York. You got to go to the Culinary Institute of America. That's the real place where it happens. It's the world's best culinary school. And I said, okay, well, one of the things that I really loved about that life was that in hospitality, everybody's so necessary. You miss one person, or one person doesn't do their job, everybody feels it. So I was always so fascinated with how it kind of felt like sports. Everybody had to be doing their job and working together, and always really focused on sort of the leadership elements of that. And what's really cool about that profession is if you're good at it, you can do it anywhere. So I took full use of that, and I was able to get a really good experience working at some of the best restaurants in some of the best country clubs in the country, with a stop in the St. Lucia being one of those places, because I thought Caribbean food was kind of cool and not too bad. I think I was 23 at the time. Not too bad of a situation to be able to go try that out and get to live that life. So to your point, is like each one of those places have some things in common, and each one of those things have things that are different. There's this quote that I think of as, and I don't know who it is, but it's like, wherever you go, there you are. So in all that sort of movement, you kind of get to see what's true, what's repeating itself, and what changes from place to place.
Wow. So cooking.
You asked for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So cooking Caribbean food, I mean, and that's like totally different than anything we're finding here in Midland. Did you bring any of those dishes back when you finally got here? And
well, so that was kind of what did it. So I was in Washington, D.C. doing workforce development in hospitality, because the district understood how integral that sector is to be able to create a really strong enticement to be able to live and stay there. So I also had a business in Washington, D.C., which is kind of what helped me get connected to that and to developing corridor. So I started to like move into all those pieces in the like early mid 20-teens. And being that I've always fascinated on the people dynamic, I always kept on going to like, what's the thing that informs the thing, or what's the thing that influences the thing? So in those latter years, really focusing on what hospitality means from a workforce development perspective in the service of economic development. And, I thought to myself, well, I'm missing a lot of surgeries and birthdays back home. I wonder if there's a way to apply these things back in Michigan, because this is quite valuable here. So I was working with a recruiter in Detroit. He's like, I don't know, man, that's a really weird combination. But he reached out shortly thereafter and said, I got something for you. It's not in Detroit, but it's in Midland. And it was a partnership between Dow and the Midland Country Club, the first Dow championship, or at the time the GLBI was coming into town, and the country club was really poised to be able to showcase all the great things that it had to offer. So that was really the impetus of it. So I thought to myself, well, could be not quite home. It's an hour and a half away, from my nearest relatives, which is not too bad, because then every Sunday you're not expected to be there. You can kind of keep doing your thing. But it was close enough that if someone's birthday or something like that was around the corner, I could make it to those things. But I'd never been to Midland before, never heard of Midland before, so all that was new.
It's very interesting. Someone comes in and they're like, I'm a chef slash psychologist slash like
Yeah.
expert in this workforce development space. And I have passion around here. Like, what can you find for me? And then you end up here. So if it wasn't for the Great Lakes Bay Invitational at the time, do you think that you would have ever came to Midland? Like,
No,
if that tournament doesn't exist, do you still get recruited to the country club?
No. And also, if Dow didn't have such an emphasis on being able to think about vibrance in the community. So in those interviews, I was able to meet with Howard Underliner and Jim Fitterling, and we were talking about, well, let's focus on adding
Flex.
value. Well,
Keep going. I'm
let's
kidding.
talk about adding value to the country club, and if you can manage it, then let's maybe go from there and see what we can do looking at the industry as a whole. Not too different from DC, certainly adapted. And I really liked the opportunity for that challenge. I thought to myself, well, in metropolitan areas, population's really high. A lot of things are already in motion. Here, there's a lot of freedom being, offered to you, and a lot of opportunity, and it's a lot smaller. So if I thought to myself, if I do this right, I should be able to make an impact a bit faster than I might be able to do. And that, in conjunction with my family being, an hour and a half south, was like, all right, let's give this a shot.
So growing up in Oakland County, we'll back up a little bit. Did you ever journey to Midland for anything?
We drove past the Zilwaukee Bridge, and that was up north. And then we would go to Mayo or Roscommon, where my grandparents lived, and it was just that straight 75 shot. So really where I missed this area was getting on 10.
Well, and I'd argue that the true gateway to the north is that US 10 corridor. I know Claire has grabbed that, and I'm happy that they are able to brand around that incredible small community. But I always had this professor at SVSU who would say, the world really drops off at the US 10 I-75 corridor. And even just last week, I had a conversation with someone, and they're like, where does up north start? And I was like, well, I'm from Beaverton. It was up north. And I considered it up north, even living there, with my family originally being from the Flint area. And that was the retirement place. And I grew up with my grandparents, and my grandpa retired, even though he laid tile floor until he was 81 years old or something, in Beaverton. So, we come up to Beaverton, it's like, I live up north, and anything north of 10 is up north. So, sitting here at JNC Media right now, I'm trying to think. We are not official. Are we official? We're not officially up north then, by my calculations. If we go about a mile that way, we'd be up north.
Yeah, the distinction. I really don't know what difference it makes. So like you grow up and above or below, but you never really hear too much about what difference it makes. You just hear geographically. You're like, I'm up north and I'm downstate. But yeah, that was kind of the experience that I had as far as up in this area, like going to like Houghton Lake or Higgins Lake was part of the recreation. We really looked forward to being able to do that. In Oakland County, the roads are based on where the lakes are. So everybody's living on the lake and enjoying the lake. So that was a really nice amenity to have. And I think it's something that I still like. I've been able to reclaim that experience since moving here, to go out there, and it feels really nice.
So without having experience directly in Midland, but just kind of knowing geographically where it was in the state, what were your expectations before you did any research of Midland?
Well, I started looking to see like what there was to do, like, well, what can I do? And then I can take a look at what there is to do and then kind of picture whether that would resonate. Now, to our initial point, I work a lot. I really like work. I like working so much that I study work. And that's what I do for enjoyment. But I also knew that that's not all the time. I still got to eat, still go for a walk and things like that. And so I was really taking a look at the size of the population. I was really looking at some of the intentions, or like how are things built. The aesthetics is something that comes up a lot because I do think that that's a really strong representation of how people are caring for the community. And you could look at those little details of like, are the sidewalks clean? Are people looking you in the eye or saying, giving you a smile? Things like that. So I was kind of looking at like, what's the sort of culture like, both in the aesthetics and then just the people passing by. So I came right through MBS and drove into town, and that was like, that was first time. So downtown near the H was where I was staying. So the first thing I did, dropped my bags and walked out. There was some people over by the Tridge hanging out and just really getting a pulse for that. We're talking about feeling that energy thing is just, I can't define how to do it, but just feeling that and seeing how it was matching and meshing with me.
And that first impression somebody gets of a place, it's really similar to a human, right? It kind of sticks with you, and immediately it takes hold of the way you feel about a place, and it takes a lot to undo that. So when you're working to bring people to a community and invite them into what you have going on and trying to say, come on, come here, come just check it out. It's just an invitation to check it out at first. What was, you're kind of in this globe, you're in this bubble, and you're trying to figure it out. And what kind of flavor did Midland really give you?
Well, I thought that the hotel was designed expertly. I had like I'm pretty big on aesthetics and things like that in general. I just get in a better mindset if the environment's right. So I remember looking at, I think it's the butterfly wall, and I can see that as I'm thinking. I can remember very clearly there's some artistry of a squirrel, and then there's an acorn in the other photo. It'd be a psychology guy. There's all sorts of analysis I did. I'm like, that's some thought there. And walking, I really appreciated the green space. Which in metropolitan areas, it's usually like sort of off to one place or maybe in a 2 or 3 places. But I was really looking for that. That was something that, like, smelling grass isn't something that you just walk out or walk around or get that in your day-to-day life. So I remember appreciating that. And I remember, walking to the Tridge and seeing the statue of the elderly couple, and I just thought that that's a really nice sentiment. And I thought it really characterized what I thought that the town felt like. This is a place where kinship or families, for love, for bond. And I think that statue says a lot quietly, but that really resonated with me too.
That statue is really important. We've actually never talked about the statue here on the show, but that statue, I think it's called The Couple. And I think it's representative of Carl and Esther Gerstacker, but not directly of them. And that's on purpose, because similar to how Max loves Midland, I've only been called Max on the street a couple times now. So, but similar to Max loves Midland, it's not supposed to represent specific people. You're supposed to be able to see yourself in that. Yeah. And I think that's a really interesting concept of, right in front of our largest landmark. And, we reference the Tridge jokingly a lot of times on this show. And it becomes kind of this trope that we go back to just because it is our thing. But it is our thing. It's on like every logo in town. It's a part of the Midland Business Alliance's logo somehow. It's a part of the Midland Area Community Foundation's logo. It really is kind of our beacon of placemaking, honestly. And it was a forward-thinking idea. A lot of people call it a bridge to nowhere. We have the newspaper clippings in the basement of the foundation, and I've looked at them a few times, and I've thought about pulling them out for the show and just kind of having conversations around them. But it just emphasizes even the importance of place then, even though we weren't saying it as directly. This concept of place wasn't as built out. It was more concept of opportunity of work was kind of how people positioned, why don't you come here? And that is why you came here, was opportunity of work. But you're still checking out these other factors that if they don't fit right, then, this experience of kind of rolling through the town doesn't work out for you. Yeah,
even if I'm working a lot, I still am going to be in an environment, and that environment's going to have an effect on me. So it has to be one that's positive. So in my earlier years, I grew up in Waterford near the border of Pontiac, and I've got a lot of love for that. But there's certainly places and areas there which even to this day still haven't necessarily been built up to the degree that one might deserve.
Absolutely.
And that, whether I knew it or not, certainly had an influence on maybe my thoughts or feelings or the way that I'm kind of going about life. So I think that's in part where that kind of came from. So I was really looking to see where that care and where that reverence was. Of if you got to take care of your space if you're going to do anything great with it. So I was really looking at that side of things. And to your point on the Tridge, like in that idea is just sort of this place for connection. Whereas in a lot of the metropolitan places, it might be a little bit harder to encounter. It might be a bit more individualistic, or you're on the go doing your own thing, and all that stuff's great. But that idea of being able to be connected, I thought was something that was valued.
Now, the experience you get at the H Hotel, and you're kind of put into, the center of our town, or really the front porch of a community is usually a community's downtown, or the back porch, however you want to say it. And, you're at the H, and you have this great walkable space. That becomes not the place you end up living, though.
Yeah, so I didn't get a house at the H or next door.
Exactly. And, the carpet was rolled out, and I think that's amazing that when you were brought in, you were given that kind of experience. You fly into MBS, it's real close. You get to see how quick you can get to an airport, which is awesome. The city of Midland has stake in that airport, and it really services our area in such an important way. But then, you stay at the H, and you see the Tridge, and all this stuff's great, and then you sign on the dotted line, and you work here. But now you're dropped into the mix officially. You become what I am here, right? Yeah. A working citizen within our community, or a working young professional within our community. And what does that feel like then? It's different than that experience you get at the H, right?
Yeah, well, so in my case, I had to come back twice. I don't know if I didn't interview as strongly if I needed to, or it was a competitive pool. They really wanted to get the right person, so there were recruiters from different metropolitan areas trying to get the right fit. So on my second time coming back, I stayed with my family down in Oakland County. I think it was like in July. It was the summertime, and I drove in through 75 and through 10. I kind of wanted to also see what it's like to traverse. And on that encounter, I needed a phone charger. And my first stop was Kmart, who's no longer with us, as many Kmarts are.
You were here in the Kmart era. That's awesome.
just prior, I think, and I needed a charger. And I went in, and hopefully the people running that place aren't listening, but a lot of the lights weren't working. Some of them were flickering. The merchandising wasn't as good as you might want or expect, and just a really sort of bleak thing. And we were talking about how much attention I pay to aesthetics and stuff, and then my initial response was, I can't do this. It wasn't really to do anything with anything else. Like, I wasn't hesitant prior to that, but I was like,
just didn't feel right.
Yeah, this is a stark difference compared to what we saw downtown. And then I actually was quite curious about that. I was like, man, and I know that usually your districts are like centralized, and then they sort of work in concentric circles in terms of how built up they are. But then I was quite curious. So I ate a burger at A&W, and then just thought about it. I like to be in places early. And then I went in for the second set of interviews. And the thing that I took was, like, there's an opportunity. Like, this isn't a finished place yet. It's a place in progress. And that was very encouraging to me, because I like working, and I like a challenge, and I like also when there's foundations too. So my bet was that I bet that this is a place where there's opportunity to actually make a difference. The idea of walking into something where you're just maintaining something that's already damn near utopic it wouldn't be super strong to me. So that was the attitude that I took on it, and I really liked everything that I heard about those overall intentions, and I liked the challenge of saying, well, let's see what you can do with that.
One, I think in Midland, we've always been very thankful for the things that we have, and it's been said so many times on the show, we punch above our weight for our population, and a lot of that is to do with that incredible corporation that kind of pulled you in here with that big red diamond that sits on the other side of town. And we've been very fortunate to have an influx of steady revenue, to have steady population. But I don't think that's really resulted in us being stagnant. And what kept me here as a young professional, and I've had opportunities to go elsewhere as well, was this idea, well, I have family locally as well. So just be honest, my grandpa's here, and it's really important to me. My dad's here, and, being close to them. But beyond that emotional bond of family, so again, we're talking about love, but it's a community with a direction that really, really cares. And community leaders that really, really care. And when you have a direction, you have an identity. And Max Loves Midland wouldn't exist if it wasn't for, this long period of work that's already taking place where people care to move that forward. So it's an invitation to join the work. And that's unbelievable, because a lot of places you get somewhere and it's like, oh, well, welcome to wherever. I don't want to down anybody's city, and I never will on the show, but it's just that idea of like, welcome to our community, and we're awesome, and this is all incredible. And, there's a level of that here on Max Loves Midland, but we're never losing track of the fact that we have to move toward goals still. Yeah. And, what were some of those goals that you saw immediately in Midland, or trajectory that you could really inject yourself into?
That's a really good question, Kev. I'm really big on vision, so because things should be connected to a vision. So if you have to have some sort of concerted identity of where you'd like things to go, and then your efforts should be applied to that. And you want to choose a place where you believe in that. But once a vision is set, then that's kind of your question: is, does that vibe with me? Does that mesh with me? And then now I'm going to roll up my sleeves and see what I can do. So I really liked the aspirations that are stated in the community's vision, right? And especially talking about these ideas of inclusivity, right? And I think that's kind of progressive for the Midwest, and I really like that. That certainly resonated from my experience in Washington, D.C., where I was working with a lot of people from different nationalities and ethnicities. So I liked the idea of seeing what I might be able to do to help be an advocate for that. that was very, very gripping. But just the sheer fact that there was one that was stated, to your point, is a lot of places aren't so explicit with it. So I appreciated that piece. And then I started trying to think and working hard as I would identify what I can do to be of value. Is like, well, what fits into that setup or that structure that's identified.
And it's the same thing, when I think about, that structure and that opportunity to play a part in this, I think a lot about role. And I think you and I meet in the middle a lot on thinking about role and how important that is within a community. And when we go through some framework later on in part 2 of this, we'll talk a lot more about role and where people fit into that. But you're never explicitly told, like, hey, you're here. Now you get a chance to find your role in the community. It's never, you're not licensed that. It's more of a unspoken bond of, we are working towards goals. Now, how are you going to fit into this and find your specific role in that? And that is separate from job role. That's separate from title. That's separate from maybe even your core competencies. It might be your passion area. And wherever you can fit into that space, that's where you have to fit into. And I think it's almost a duty to be able to find your role within a community. And you only really start looking for that role if you feel that emotional connection to a place to be able to find it.
For sure. Like, I think of like kids on a playground as like the playground's built. We can use that as a metaphor for the community. There's people already at play. If you're just got to the playground, it's your job to kind of, and kids do this all the time, is that it's your job to survey how to get in the game, figure out what game's being played, what you can do to add value to that game. You can't just sit there on the bench waiting for somebody to go grab you and tell you exactly what you're going to do, nor do I think that's really what people want. So I couldn't agree with you more about it's a person or an individual's responsibility to have their eyes out and to be mindful of what is it that I see that I could be valuable in, and then through that you can foster the relationship. But I don't think you can sit and wait for it to come to you. It wasn't so fast acting for me because the pandemic and the flood happened shortly thereafter, but man, I remember I think I was going to get Hungry Howie's pizza, and then I was at the time it was EFPN or McFan now is our food pantry, and it has like people helping people. And in DC, I was really looking to get more tapped into our food systems and being able to help people who don't have as much food as they probably need to have. There was a flyer, but I don't really know exactly what I would do, but I know that I've wanted to do that, and that was in mind. And flash forward to years later, we have this beautiful program, like you mentioned earlier, like Regrow Midland, and now in its current form, Regrow together with the United Way Midland County. And I'm able to play a part in feeding a lot of people. So, but that's something that I had to do, is I had to look for the opportunities. The opportunities are there, but you gotta take them.
Well, and there's psychological safety involved with wanting to go after those opportunities as well. So you have to feel safe within an area to be able to take that risk. And for those that aren't CEOs or presidents of an organization, a lot of times we're not necessarily afraid to say no. We're afraid to say yes because if you say yes and you fail, it's what's the degree of failure here? And you have to be able to be licensed, to be trusted, and to have that type of safety to jump and get into a program like that. And you mentioned Regrow Midland and now Regrow Together, housed at United Way in Midland County. And we love our friends at United Way. They do so much incredible work for this community. And they're incredible community conveners that really bring people together to bring work forward in the community.
Yes.
So how did that partnership take place?
Holy cannoli. We're going to do a lot of time. Well, the initial inception was during the pandemic and flood. There was you couldn't go into a restaurant, and the community knew that without being able to have patrons going into restaurants, these businesses, the restaurants that we do have, are going to have a hard time getting the sales that they need to be able to stay afloat. So the community came together. I'm going to do the fastest version of this as I can. Community came together, developed a set of funds to be able to say we want to pay restaurants to be able to cook healthy meals and feed those to our family centers and beyond, where we know that there's a need in our community to feed people. Jason, you think you could build out a program that would work? There's a lot of support around it, so it certainly wasn't just me. But do you think that you could build up the pieces of that and make sure it runs well? I said, yeah, I could do that. And we did, and that went super good. But it was an expensive program because you're putting a lot of money in food businesses. So that had to go away because we always knew it would be as a short-term acute response to a need. But our family centers, our food distribution sites like that. And I said, well, I thought y'all had something like this already. Like, well, y'all offer meals, and that's very helpful. People like the fact that there are meals that are nutritious, that are ready to eat for people that can or won't cook. So then it took me a couple months, like, well, we got to figure out how to do this for virtually no dollars because it costs money to get food and it costs money to get people to prepare food. So without belaboring the details, we put that together, and now it's like 14 partners around the county. And, as of the end of this month, we'll have done 50,000 meals in the year and a half that we've done it in this current form. And then combined, that would be 100,000 meals between both of those programs. So to that point of like really a couple years ago, waiting for my pizza at Hungry Howie's to being able to do something very enriching, you may have to do some work and you may have to be patient, but this is a place where it can come together.
One of the number one calls to 211 in our area is food insecurity, and that is a prime example of many folks coming together from different organizations, United Way from the convening lens, you from the expertise in the specific area of that food delivery process. I've talked with Phoenix Community Farms and how they've grown even as an organization, how many pounds of food they've been able to get out, and their role in this as well. And there's just so many people coming together to make that great stuff happen. And it's just another example of collective impact, but just the idea of, we are by the people for the people as a community, and how are we coming together to work together in order to move things forward? And I love that it's now Regrow Together.
Yeah.
What an incredible rebrand on that even. So,
yeah, we had to make sure we could secure the name, which we've been able to do. And is we wanted to make sure we could secure a name that's actually makes sense and also speaks to what it is that we do. So it's been a phenomenal opportunity for me to be able to, it was actually probably the primary way that I actually got into the community at large, to be able to start working with the different entities originally. That was actually how I encountered the Midland Business Alliance for the first time and getting to meet Tony Stamas. And then shortly thereafter being able to work with, my brilliant colleague, Nicole Wilson. And then through that, Sharon Mortensen through the Community Foundation, who later on told me, you need to go speak with Windover High School, you need to go speak with Phoenix Community Farms. So it's as much as I had an intention, the community was definitely reciprocating that effort.
So many incredible people here too, and just a lot of wealth and knowledge here in Midland, and willingness to look for ways to say yes. And you just mentioned a lot of leaders that look for ways to say yes. I've known Nicole for years now. We work together at the city and just always kind of looking forward at business. Tony always just so open and, greeting you with a smile and a great dad joke. And then Sharon, just an incredible leader, and, Holly at United Way. And we just have amazing people here that are looking for ways to say yes and looking for ways to be innovative and not afraid to have tough conversations either, and just look at these differences and where we can all fit. And there's some magic found in that. And I think there's no question why, you can find a home here, right?
Yes. So in that space in between the first program with Regrow Midland to Regrow Together, it was $10,000 in a reservoir that we hadn't appropriated. I'm like, well, we need to figure out a use for it. This was during the GLBI, or the Dow Championship. I knew there'd be some surplus food there, and they're like, let me see what we can do to be able to provide meals at low to no cost. And I did so, and then I brought the case to Tony, Sharon, and David Raymaker, and shortly thereafter meeting Holly Miller, I was like, you need to go to the Hunger Connections, which is a whole committee that's focused around the exact core issue you're talking about. And then that opened up into another concentric circle of people. I never really think of it as like a network, because it's just a little more personal than that, or at least that's not how the people come to me when I think or consider them. And the interactions are a lot more personal, and they're not just so transactional than maybe what I've experienced, at least in the past.
And now I think about you being a community member and making connections with other people in the community. We just talked about a lot of connections that you made through some really professional, professional introductions and, an introduction to this program. But the first time I met you was just like a common dinner held at a restaurant downtown out on a patio.
Yep.
And it wasn't through my work at the Community Foundation. It wasn't through your work at the time at the Country Club or Regrow Midland. It was just organically we met. So how did you begin meeting other people within town to kind of build out your own personal network beyond these workspaces?
Well, it wasn't so easy for a couple reasons that are to do with me. So, when you move around, like there's really not the case here, but we kind of get labeled as like a transplant or an implant when you're somebody from out of town. In the metropolitan areas, that's par for the course. Like, yeah, so am I. Join the club, and through that club, you're kind of like, all right, we're new too. It was kind of not the case here. It's like everybody knows each other really good. I was saying it to you.
They're like, believe me, I'm an outsider. I'm from Freeland. Like, wait a second.
I think I told you in another conversation that despite my attempts, I've never been able to introduce two people here in Midland. Every time I think that I'm like, like, yeah, I'd like you to meet. So it's like we're related, or we worked together for 9 years or something like that. So in that regard, there was definitely like a lot of like, we've been going back to that playground reference. Everybody here has been playing together for a long time, and nobody knows you, and that's not really the norm. It was maybe kind of like that freshman year experience that I was talking about, of like, you're new and nobody knows now. I definitely think I do okay socially, but I definitely, my normal tendency might be a bit more behind the scenes. The metropolitan area sort of forced that, it's like, well, the scene is everywhere. Here, it was a little bit trickier in being able to figure out how to adapt that here. So I like to say that I highly overestimated my charm in that regard. And then the pandemic and the flood didn't make matters easier. But I would say that as you start to then get into making those connections, those things amplify and compound radically more quickly than I've ever been able to witness anywhere before. And I think people are really warm and receptive to it. I think you have to be competent. I think you have to be trustworthy. I think you have to do what you say you'll do. I think that that's true anywhere, but I just feel like what makes Midland a little different is I think that that's valued and respected, and I think that when you showcase that, I think that you get invited to the playground more and more.
Absolutely, and that's our goal with Max, is just find a way to showcase all the amazing things going on within our community and invite people into what we have going on here. Because at the time, what kind of online resources were you finding? You're Googling, your place and you live. Like, what are you getting out of that?
Yeah, that's actually what I did, Kevin. I Googled Midland, and then I saw the hotel. I did like the 360 of the main street, and then I was here. So that was at least that's what I knew about as far as what was available to me to figure out how to get a feel for it from a distance. But certainly it would have been more helpful for me to get a more thorough feel, because that's a pretty critical decision and a multifaceted decision too. But I didn't really have many tools at my disposal besides maybe an overestimation of my charm, really having that sense of like, wow, I bet that some traction would occur faster here. And that more or less panned out, but
well, sometimes it just takes a third place, like Decker's, right? You head into Decker's, you do a little karaoke, and sometimes that's all you need.
Yeah, well, and that overestimating a charm, I then like to say is, Midland was a great place to raise a family, but a harder one to find one, or at least for me. I came here when I was 34. So when I hear these sort of conversations about how do we bring in 18 to 34-year-olds, I'm like, well, I've got some lived experience. I'm just one person, but I definitely live that pretty directly in terms of what that is like. So,
and you have found love here in Midland, or found a relationship here in Midland,
we'll
and
show her face on the
we'll just get it all like blown up. Nah, we don't need to do that. But
my girlfriend Jody, and I couldn't be more pleased. And I guess one of the things that I love the most about her is how like-minded the values are, and maybe they're like Michigan values or Midwest values or something like that, whereas they're just maybe a bit different or a bit more scattered in more metropolitan places. So I definitely appreciate whatever it is that we're doing to be able to get some strong values into our people.
So you take this journey, you meet all these people, and you eventually start building a life here. You develop a relationship, and you make this career change. So how do you end up going from the country club to the Midland Business Alliance? I'm not sure if I'm even really clear on how this journey took place for you.
Well, so part of the country club's thing was that dual experience of hospitality. There's the second floor in the country club is reserved for some of Dow's top executives to be able to bring in, high stakes business partners that are currently existing or ones that they'd like to exist. And that space up there really needs to feel top notch, something maybe like a Chicago or New York, where just some of the ways that we were describing it is like, we really want to have this second to none experience. And well, maybe since I had those experiences myself and worked in those types of places, I could provide that. But in between that, recognizing that the country club is an asset that's being championed through Dow, through the Dow Championship, it really being able to think about how can we bolster that holistically. And then the intersection for me is all about how do you get people better for their organizations and how do you make organizations better for their people. So that was just such a beautiful opportunity. And actually, I would say that the flood and the pandemic really carved space to work on those things. The country club is booming, and there's a lot of time and need to work in the business and tough to work on the business, especially during those summer months where the pool is packed, the golf course, has got people everywhere. You got a dining room that's full, fitness center. So that really allowed us a chance to be able to sit down and look at something that was in the strategic plan for 2025, which is being an employer of choice. And, through the leadership of Todd Beals and Kevin, was able to work so closely to be able to flesh that work out.
Yeah.
We did all sorts of things. But my sentiment was, well, if I'm still needed, the good leaders are kind of putting themselves out of the job kind of thing, was, well, if in 5 years, if we haven't achieved this, or if I'm still vital and integral and have to be part of this, then I'm really not doing such a great job in that regard. And also, Regrow Together was getting larger. I was working with World Central Kitchen on some of the relief training and development efforts. And then the MBA was like, well, we like what you're doing with workforce development. I had successfully done a couple training grants through Michigan Works and things like that. And then through cultivating that relationship through Regrow Midland, it's like, hey, can you work with us too? So it was just sort of the time to be able to say, all right, start with the club and go from there. So I'm like, all right, well, let's go from there. And that's what I've been able to do in the last year and a couple months now, is really move on. It was a fantastic succession plan, if I do say so myself, that I helped the club work through and worked with Dow, and then be able to really make things, better. So my final swan song was like, through my departure, the succession will be so strong in this that it's like, man, this is fantastic. It's actually better now in terms of how we can restructure things. So I'm always about trying to leave people or things better than I found them.
Not all divorces are created equal. That is that's a fantastic way to kind of think about moving into that next stage of your life, and kind of closing that chapter and inviting other people into that same talent development and retention cycle.
Yeah, and I'm working through my doctorate's degree at Northwood University or DeVos Graduate School of Management, and that's definitely an undertaking as well. So just looking at, everybody likes to say their capacity or bandwidth. I don't like to use metaphors that make me sound like a computer, but recognizing the being able to do everything really, really well. Whether that's something that other people perceive or whether it's my own, expectations or standards for myself. So really in this new era is really just doubling down on what it means to be people, especially in the workplace. It's an asset that all organizations have to some degree, and I'd say it's the most agile or the most malleable asset that organizations have. And I've been working a long time, and I've had jobs that are really not so great, and I've had jobs that are great. And I know that work can be fantastic on a given day or a given year, and I know that work cannot. So to me, if I can do my part to be able to help make work be a little bit better, although I got much higher expectations, I want work to be great for as many people as I can. I think that that's a worthy thing. And I think that it's a big enough and a big enough challenge to keep me busy for a long time. And it's not a challenge that's going away. People are going to keep working, and we want to keep having them. For me, I think that it's better if people are having a good go of it, not just doing it because they have to, but doing it because they want to.
So what is your official title right now with Midland Business Alliance? So we go to the website, click, Jason Story.
I don't know. Titles are important for sure because they help orient, but it's the Director of Talent and Small Business Initiatives. I like to joke with Tony and Nicole that I'm working my way up to large business initiatives, but it's a bit different in its orientation in terms of what's needed and things like that. And certainly the Midland Business Alliance and the community is very receptive of those needs at the small business level, and they are a bit different. They're not necessarily completely separate, but they're definitely differentiated in what those needs are.
Well, amazing. So now you're back home, kind of. You're no longer missing as many surgeries and as many birthdays and as many weddings. I'm sure you're still missing a few. It's a long drive down I-75, but
especially in one day, to come back.
But just touching back to your teenage years, so you're driving around in your vehicle around Oakland County.
Ford Taurus, yeah.
Ford Taurus. So did you have thumpers in the trunk? Could we hear you coming?
I didn't have other things, but I had that.
Okay, no, don't. I didn't say choppers. So we got those big speakers.
Oh yeah, that was an indicator for I don't know, expression. So, you're asking about feeling yourself out or, finding yourself. I definitely found a lot of that in music. So the louder, the better. Maybe you find yourself faster if the music's louder.
So, generationally, I'm sure it's going to shake out like this, but I would love to talk a little bit about some of our favorite hip hop artists. Both of you and I are, we're not the authority in the genre at all.
Yeah,
but I think a lot of our favorites are going to come out probably what we were playing in our cars at those specific times in our life. Now, I'm not going to throw you any curveballs and say Soulja Boy just because I'm a little 2009 graduate. You're not going to go quite that far. But when I was riding around in my red Chevy Cavalier with the flip screen, may I add, because I saved up for a long time and went to Best Buy, RIP Best Buy, a place that I worked here in Midland as well. So shout out to Aldi. That's where Best Buy was, by the way. So we go into Best Buy and, went in the bay there and got the little flip screen installed and just thought it was the coolest thing and, made my 25-minute trip over here to Midland to get that. And I might have had a few of these artists that I have written down on this piece of paper playing. So it's a little bit different, and I'm going to let everyone kind of know that traditionally when we do an episode of the Maxwell's Midland Show, we sit down and we do like an hour-long pre-interview. We grab some coffee and we break that ice. We kind of rush this one through in order to support a release schedule here on the show. So we didn't quite flesh this out all the way. So here's the way the draft works. It's 5 picks. You get the first pick. We can't repeat picks.
Sure.
So if you pick one, then it's off the map. So, and as the guest, you always get the first pick. So we're going to talk our favorite, and we'll be pretty liberal with it. So I'm not going to put too many boxes around it. Argue rap, hip hop.
For sure. Sure.
It doesn't need to be like that. But let's talk favorite 5 hip hop artists. So let's go with number 1 for you.
Well, Jay-Z, the Blueprint album was what I was listening to, I think, to give me some shape into adulthood. And I was listening to it with that in mind. Certainly this idea of, one of the things I like about hip hop is it's always there's some self-efficacy there. I'm in a tough situation, but I believe I can get to a better one. There's a belief there that there's a promising future. And certainly that album, I think, was kind of laying that out for me. I didn't necessarily know how to, get where I was trying to go in those teenage years. But I remember thinking about that in that album. Like, wow, this has really got some good advice in it.
Now, that's amazing because Jay-Z would have been definitely high up on my list as well. And I was fortunate enough to go see Jay-Z and Kanye West, which I named on this show as one of my favorite shows I've ever seen. The Watch the Throne tour, I caught it in like back-to-back nights. It was so good in Detroit that I went to Chicago the next day with my friend Kyle, and we had an absolute blast. And shout out to Kyle, just had a baby, so shout out to Kyle. So I got to pick the other half of this, and I know the comments are going to be funny already, but I have to go with Kanye West then as my number 1 pick if you're going to take Jay off the board. And we're going to, I get it. I can't ignore all of the obvious things that come along with choosing Kanye West as number 1 on the list, but we will talk about music just for a second. I mean, the college dropout, late registration, graduation. I mean, that run is insane doing that trilogy, but then to have, another trilogy that looks like 808s and Heartbreak, Jesus, and Life of Pablo. It's one of the best discographies in hip hop, and all of those played so massively in my vehicles and in my headphones, some of my first iPods.
Right on.
Obviously it's on compact disc as well. So I'm going to go yay number 1. And I apologize to everyone out there who that may offend. So let's go number 2 for you.
Well, maybe I can offend too, but Drake, maybe not until recently.
Drake high.
Yeah, well, because I think he brought vulnerability to hip hop, whereas prior to that, it's all a little bit machismo and a bit sort of alpha. Even if it's a bit of a fake alpha, I'm tough. I've got no chinks in my armor. Where I think Drake really, part of his popularity comes from being able to bring that vulnerable side of things. There's all that self-efficacy and belief and sort of confidence and all that, but there's also that part of like thinking about maybe those places that aren't so built out or confident, those things that you're not sure about. So I really appreciated that because it accounted for another side of the spectrum that I hadn't heard in hip hop before.
Yeah, that's a newer artist too. I mean, in terms of like the last 15 years. So what's your favorite Drake album? Do you have a record that you go to, or do you kind of go back just back and forth on the singles? He's a great singles artist. So
yeah, if I had to do one, probably if you're reading this, it's too late.
Correct answer.
Yeah.
Correct answer.
I know that you're an aficionado, and I don't let the blue shirt fool you. I didn't bring my gold fronts, but I grew up at the border of Waterford and Pontiac, where hip hop is very well respected, and I respected it too. So I appreciate the kudos.
Absolutely, no, that is correct answer for sure. So. So we're going to go number 2 here for me. I'm going to go a new artist as well. This is somebody I've seen live a couple times, J. Cole.
Yeah, dang.
J. Cole's awesome. He's a great live show as well. So really good time. I saw J. Cole for the first time. It was Bonnaroo 2011, I want to say, and it was a smaller stage there. But then I saw him 5 years later, and then now we're past Forest Hills Drive, which I think is one of the best hip hop albums ever, and his best album in my opinion. And other people might have some different thoughts on that, but to watch him just grow into this giant superstar, but still be so accessible and humble, and it's a lot of those intangibles you talked about with Drake.
Yeah.
Doesn't come out in the music exactly the same way, but yeah, I'm gonna go with J. Cole.
Yeah, he was actually going to be the next on the list too. Is I think what he brings to it is like just a certain like honesty.
Absolutely.
Without some of the bravado pieces. Like, let's remove the bravado. Let's remove the materialism pieces. So these artists that sort of like break the sort of confines of the imagery of what a hip hop artist were set up to be, and I think that resonates, to the audience, certainly to me. Listening to him today, getting my articulation right for my vocal warm ups with some J. Cole.
Hey, it's a little nerve wracking when you come to the studio
we'll
here.
Do a karaoke of it.
JNC Media, Josh runs a harsh bargain around here. You got to be ready when you come in here.
Yeah,
so.
We'll do like the end credits is us like a cappella karaoke.
I love that. So number 3 for you.
Well, he definitely took a good one. So I'll give, just to show my affiliation, I'll just call him Trav. But for those who aren't inducted, it'd be Travis Scott.
Okay.
For someone to be able to be like a producer, vocalist. I saw him in D.C. when he was opening up for the opening act for the weekend. They didn't even turn off the lights for him.
I went to the same tour. I saw him open up for the weekend in Detroit.
Yeah, but Travis was opening up for the opening act.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
So,
Banks was in between.
There it is.
It was Banks.
Man.
I got you. I was at that tour.
I was like, man, this guy is really putting in some energy. And I like that, Banks too, which nobody does. But I was like, wow, and I hadn't heard his music before. And but the people who had were going crazy. It was just like that group right around the stage, probably in Detroit.
Insane.
Yeah.
So I'll show you some photos in between these two podcasts we're doing here. But I was really close to the stage that night at that show. And I'd heard Travis Scott before because The Weeknd, I'm a huge Weeknd fan, and he was on Weeknd was on Travis's album, which is how that tour takes shape. And I think Trav even said on stage that night, like, this is the song that made sure I was on this tour. But the dedicated amount of fans that were just losing their minds. It's like 50 people, but it's so concentrated and so much jumping, and it was absolutely insane.
Yeah, so like that, maybe, to get all psychological, it's like that's a really good testament of like what can happen if you stick to something. Whereas now they're talking about his concerts causing earthquakes or showing up on Richter scales, right? That's not what you and I experienced.
No.
But if you stick to something and you're good at it, then you can go somewhere with it.
I'm going to go in a little bit of a different direction here, and a slightly older artist as well, but somebody I listen to a lot, and it's somebody I've never seen in concert, but Common Sense from Chicago. I love Chicago rappers across the board, so there'll be rappers that don't make this list that I really enjoy from Chicago, but and obviously, he started popping off about the time that early 90s, around the time I was born, so I don't want to just claim that I'm like this lifelong fan, but in the same way that people are finding new artists now, it's in that early 2000s period, he had this career resurgence. I think B is one of the best hip hop albums ever made. I position it extremely high. Finding Forever, I thought was a great album too. And then, you go back in the archives like Water for Chocolate, just so much good stuff there. So
good choice.
So I'm going to go with Common. So who you got for number 4?
Missy Elliott, because
Missy,
bringing like some uniqueness to it. Again, like artists that are breaking the confines while still representing the artistry, with some purity and integrity and being accepted by the core, artist group, and just really, again, doing the production and the writing and the vocals and doing that for other artists too. Is super, super impressive. I heard that when they were founded, they're like group in Virginia that they were working with. We talked more on the show. It's like she could write a song faster than people could actually like sing it. So she could be like, hear something and just have a finished product for them before it could actually even be done in real life. So just a testament to genius, something that doesn't necessarily come out when you're just listening to the music. But
now, when you were in DC, it wasn't, the height of you being this giant hip hop fan or anything like that. I mean, you're always a hip hop fan, but that area, like the DMV area, like how does that feel when it comes to music there? Because you've got so many big artists that came from that area.
Yeah. Well, so one of the big things is that it's such a diverse community that, you might hear English less predominantly than you hear other languages, or at least it might be neck and neck. But then within that, you have a really strong, vibrant culture that doesn't necessarily have too much of an affinity for, or at least this is me. So I never got to, necessarily talk too much about what people we're loving there. But they always like the things that are nearby. So like your Virginia stuff gets a lot of play, and then your New York things get a lot of play. But what I noticed there was really like focusing on what was current at the time. And maybe I'd even say that almost characterizes DC or metropolitan areas in general is that currency. Whereas like I might go on the boat with my family and I'll hear Usher, yeah, with Lil Jon, and you hear the same songs. I think we like to, keep the tradition alive here. Whereas there, my experience was just always the new and upcoming thing.
Well, I find that to be different even with us being, north of Detroit.
Yeah.
If you go to Detroit and you are in a bar, a restaurant, a club, wherever, like they're talking about artists I've never heard of that are local to Detroit, but are absolute heroes in their community. And
Donald Trump bringing Trick out.
Yeah. and then of course, Kamala's got to double back, bring out Eminem. And
a good flex there.
Yeah, I know. It's like, well, we're going to bring one out for you. so yeah, that's funny. Okay, number 4 for me. This could go a lot of different ways and a lot of artists I still like, but we're going with favorites here, not necessarily with most accomplished or best. And this person actually just recently dropped an album, and I've loved their career progression and got into them when I was about 18 years old. This is the wildest concert I've ever been to. This would be Tyler, the Creator.
Right on.
So when I saw Odd Future, I want to say it was at the Magic Stick in 2010. I was 19 years old and I felt old, which is absolutely ridiculous, but it just shows you the vibe of that crowd. But I've never been in a crowd that felt so close to just self-destruction at any moment. Everyone was so young and angsty, and I imagine this is like what a Nirvana concert felt in 1991. But this whole tight group, and it's all moving as a unit. And like my girlfriend and I at the time, and just like, we got to get back here. Like I thought disaster could strike at any moment. And then somebody did throw a bottle. There was a fight, and it's just like it really got out of control. But talking about Tyler, the Creator, and his ability to reinvent himself throughout his career, to come from this young, angsty kind of shock jock, I think it's horrorcore style rap. Like first album was called Bastard, and it's just ridiculous. And he's like having these conversations with his therapist to now, he just releases this album, Chromacopia, and it to be like raw and have these giant features on it. And, you got Lil Wayne on tracks, and that's not the first time they've collaborated, but just these huge artists and just putting up incredibly big streaming numbers by releasing an album on a Monday. Absolutely insane. So huge Tyler, the Creator fan, and I'm going with number 4 with Tyler. So now to finish your list off.
Well, I'm going to be poetic. You said disaster strikes, I think.
Yeah.
And this, thinking of Leadership Midland this year, where there's a Busta Rhymes reference.
Northern Lights.
There it is. I'd say Busta Rhymes, because just such versatility and such aggressiveness. And again, kind of breaking the molds, but still being accepted in the mainstream. I really like that when you see people that are right there at the forefront. But man, I think across the list, maybe with the exception of like Jay-Z and Drake, really like pushing things at some part of their career, but still being put right to the top.
Absolutely. So now there's so many artists left here. We're going to leave a lot of them off. We didn't mention Snoop. Nobody took Nas, and nobody took, we're talking Dre on my list too. I got Lupe Fiasco, a few people. We didn't want to put too many boxes around it. I can't separate it. I have to go Outkast as a unit.
Yeah, it was.
And I know a lot of people separate that. They go Andre 3000. Actually, when Speakerbox and Love Below came out, I was digging Speakerbox a little more. So I was a little more on the big boy side, and he's constantly touring. So I've seen him at random shows too. So, but yeah, I have to go with Outkast, and just the wild clothes, but still just the beats were so accessible. Still sounded poppy by being extremely different, and that's a skill all on its own to be like, I've never heard anything like this before, but it still sounds like pop music to me, and it's still hip hop, and it's still rap, and it's Atlanta, and it's all of these cool conversions of music. So I'm gonna go Outkast.
Certainly one of the people that brought the game to the South. The
Absolutely.
rap game. Something I got to remember. I'm in the blue shirt. I'm not in the gold fronts, but bringing the rap game to the South, whereas it really originated on the coast. California and New York. So really cool. I mean, all the Lil Wayne and all that South thing that you mentioned afterwards, and being able to make it. We were talking about inclusivity. It's like, well, the rap industry or the rap game has become way more inclusive than what it would have been 20 years ago in terms of what it makes space for.
Well, and apologies to Kendrick Lamar as well. You might have won the beef, but right here you kind of lost the war. But you didn't get picked on our top 5. But I'm a huge Kendrick fan as well. So actually, Drake's still on my list of people I haven't seen. Like you have your bucket list concerts, people you need to see. Drake's on that list. Kendrick Lamar for me is on that list, and then you've got artists in other genres. I still haven't seen Foo Fighters, so there's a few of these shows out there that have to be seen, and we mentioned a couple of those artists today. So this is what's going on in the Ford Taurus. We've got Jay-Z, Drake, Travis Scott, Missy, and Busta, and then in the Chevy Cavalier we've got Kanye West, J. Cole, Common, Tyler the Creator, and then Outkast. So I think those are pretty good lineups, and everyone can sound off in the chat about how much you hated our picks, and we won't respond, but I think that's great.
more so, put your favorite song of these people.
Absolutely.
Let's have a party about it.
Yeah, let's have some fun. Let's bring it together. No more division, right? So it's election season. We need to have some fun here, and by the time this airs, hopefully it's hopefully the election's way settled. So, and I can't believe it, but Kanye was elected president. No, I'm kidding.
He's running again.
Either way. So I think this was great. I had a really good time talking to you today, get to know you a little bit more, but this is a question I didn't prep you for, so we're going to put your Midland hat back on.
The glasses
at the
on.
end of every single episode, at least the get to know you episode style here at Maxwell's Midland, we like to know what your hopes and dreams are for the future of Midland. So when you think Midland down the road, and I know we could be really philosophical with this, but just shoot from the gut. What are you looking for from our community?
That it gets what it wants out of the city's master plan and the vision, right? So if those things are designed properly, and I believe that they are, to me, that would be the most encompassing two things that I can think of that would make things as good as they possibly could be in a way that considers the most possible variables.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, right on.
This was part one of this. So if people are waiting, if you're watching this on the first week it came out, just go ahead and wait another week, and we're going to have part two for you. And we are going to talk a little bit about some framework we have here. For what are you nicknaming this? What are you calling this?
I like to call it the people mover because it's kind of funny.
I like it,
but it has to get shopped out first. I don't think people mover is going to be the final term, but that's kind of what it is. Is like when we talk about the life cycle or the continuum or the flow of people. What are the stages and steps of that, regardless of who you may be, and regardless of whether we're talking about an individual, a team, or an organization, and regardless of whether we're talking about work or outside of work.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm looking forward to part two, and thank you guys for joining us today. It's been another great episode of the Max Loves Midland Show. Don't forget to head over to maxlovesmidland.com. We've had over 3,000 events. Those are opportunities for community members to meet one another, and I know it's something as simple as saying we have all these events posted, but that's really great if people are meeting each other and coming together and making this community a better place and hopefully realizing their role within community. There's also a ton of resources there. You can see where all this work comes from. Comes from 10 plus years of collaborative work that's been going on in our community and really based on that teachings of our community success panel. We have an incredible community vision statement. We have some incredible focus areas, and we hope here at Max Loves Midland we can continue to service those and move our community forward. And as we say at the end of every episode, if you're building a bridge and it doesn't work for you, opt out and build a tridge. Thank you for joining us. Subscribe wherever you consume media. Max Loves Midland is your entertainment, resources, and collective improvement hub for Midland County. Plan your next adventure in Midland at maxlovesmidland.com.